Hello and welcome to a new edition of the Golf Club podcast. I'm your host, Edwin Delgado, and today I have Joseph Lowery, who has balanced in ESPN, The Athletic, and is also the creator and editor of Backheeled.com. Joseph, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How's it going, man?
Man, things are good. Edwin, thank you so much for having me on. How are you?
Doing great. It's awesome to talk soccer. It's always great to talk soccer with other people invested in the sport.
Fantastic. Well, I'm stoked to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so just to give people a quick to let listeners know a little bit of what you do and some of the others that you work for.
Yeah, so I have been working in American soccer specifically for quite some time now. And at the moment, you mentioned it in the intro, I run Backheeled.com, which has been a huge joy. Fun to get to work with some awesome and very talented people, and fun to continue to write and cover and podcast about this game. So people can go check that out if they want to for all sorts of American soccer coverage. And then I do podcasting for the Total Soccer Show on there 5 days a week. Tons of fun working with those guys. Really enjoy that. And then freelance writing for ESPN and The Athletic and The Guardian and some other folks as well.
Awesome. All right, so I just wanted to start off by we're recording this on February 5th. Yesterday on Sunday, FIFA announced the designations for some of for all the match schedule for the FIFA World Cup in 2026. Obviously, the big headline is MetLife Stadium getting the final over AT&T Stadium, which was the long rumor. Just can you get your overall take on that and any other things that caught your eye on the venues?
Yeah, I think the final makes sense, right? You know, New Jersey is not the most glamorous destination. Sorry to people in New Jersey, but neither is Arlington, right? Just sort of outside of Dallas. So, you know, I think LA from a city standpoint and for some of the benefits that that provides fits and would have fit really well, but it doesn't fit the time zone for a lot of watchers that are further east, right? You think about Europe, you think about even going further east than that. Having the final on the East Coast of the US, I think makes sense in a lot of ways. So I totally understand that decision. The only other thing that really stood out to me from the city drop was the USMNT's game. So the US men's national team starting in LA, then going up to Seattle, then coming back to LA. I think Greg Berhalter in US Soccer very clearly wanted to minimize the travel that they were going to have in the group stage, which is what they could control because they did have some input with FIFA. You know, they don't control if they make it out of the group. I mean, most teams will, right, in this expanded
Yeah.
format, but they don't control, you know, what their destiny will look like after that. But I think it was a savvy play by US Soccer to try and be somewhere and not have to stray too far from their base, which will eventually be in Southern California.
Yeah, and I think it's just also we're gonna have to wait to see the entire path of what potential venues the US could move into the knockout stage because there's already talk about. I mean, Philadelphia is gonna host a round 16 game 4th of July 2026 on the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So people already are asking for a US England game.
Make it happen, people. Make it happen. That's what the people want.
For sure. Alrighty. So yeah, likewise, I think it was for the same reasons. I think it was the obvious choice. It's a little. I would have expected the US to play mostly on the East Coast, but it's a little. I was surprised to move them west, but we'll see how that goes. Uh,
Hmm.
the other thing I wanted to just move quickly to Leagues Cup. Last week we had the reveal of the groups, and for the most part, it seems like there's some intriguing matchups, but I think the one that gets the most attention is Inter Miami with Tigres and Puebla.
Hmm.
So besides, obviously, what are your biggest takeaways from the potential matches that we will see in League Cup in 2024?
Yeah, so I'm fascinated beyond even the groups, which I'll get to in just a second, about the new hub system that Leagues Cup is trying to implement with Liga MX teams getting, you know, some preferential treatment of at least some of the better ones. I think it was very poorly phrased and communicated in how the announcement was released to the point where I still feel like a lot of folks, myself included, don't have a great grasp of what this actually means. But when we look towards the groups themselves, I mean, you mentioned one group there in Tigres and Puebla and Inter Miami that does certainly seem like a really exciting one. The other one that comes to mind for me is over on the West Coast, to stick out there. Chivas, San Jose, LA Galaxy. It's the other obvious one, right, Edwin?
Yeah,
Like, you have the two MLS players that have gone to Chivas now being reunited with their old teams in Javier Chicharito Hernandez going from the Galaxy to Chivas this winter, and Cade Cowell going from the Quakes to Chivas as well, both of whom pulled out all of the stops for their sort of introductions with the outfits and the hair and all this stuff. Like there were some crazy scenes surrounding those moves. That group over in the West, I think, is a really, really strong one. Outside of that, to be honest, I like one of the other ones in the East, Cincy and NYCFC, along with Querétaro. I'm not really drawn in a ton by the rest of the groups in this opening round, but I'm sure that more and more storylines will develop as the season goes on.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. Because I remember last year, for example, there was a big storyline with Pulido potentially going back to Chivas and
Right.
playing each other in the group stage. But yeah, we'll see. The only thing I was thinking about this recently is I'm concerned because the Copa America final will be on the 14th of July, and Leagues Cup starts probably a little bit more than a week after that. So I'm concerned if Miami and Tigres is very early on in that group stage that we may not see Messi playing.
Yeah. It's a really great call on your part, Edwin. I looked into the regular season stuff for Miami, and if Argentina make a deep run in the Copa America and Messi, will be released a bit before so we can go and train and be with the Argentine national team, like if that happens, he could miss more than a fifth of Inter Miami's regular season just for that tournament on its own, right? Then you factor in Leagues Cup and maybe the tight turnaround there, and maybe he misses a game on that end. And not only all that stuff, but he can't seem to stay healthy right now regardless. So I think in general, 2024 is setting up to be a very fun year for Miami. And I think there are lots of great storylines across the league in Major League Soccer and across the region. But I also wouldn't surprise me if we get quite a few fans who are let down in matchups that end up being not quite as enticing as we thought they could be when they were first released for, for whatever Messi injury situation looks like as the year goes on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking to this, we were doing a little bit of a season outlook for Inter Miami with one of the beat reporters. And obviously the injury of Facundo Farias plays a big role into that because it seemed that Facundo is one of those players that could get more minutes when Messi wasn't around. And now he's out for the entire season.
Yeah, it hurts. It absolutely hurts. And I sort of thought that Miami would bring in a replacement. They put Farias on the season-ending injury list, and maybe they'd bring in somebody to occupy that U22 slot, and they haven't at this point. So they seem pretty comfortable, at least at the moment, letting Robert Taylor soak up some of those minutes. But yeah, the depth seems to be thinning as the preseason continues for Miami.
Yeah. All right. And just do you have any potential sleeper matchups in the Leagues Cup? Because let me see, I was just looking at the groups. So I was thinking potentially, where was the one I was thinking? I mean, Toluca with Sport KC could be an interesting one, but I was thinking of Pachuca Red Bulls could be another interesting. Pachuca is steamrolling early on the Clausura season so far in Liga MX, so that could be another.
Yeah, no, I like all those shots. I'm curious to see what these groups are going to look like. And then you get Club America and the Columbus Crew automatically into the round of 32. I think there'll be some really fun matchups there as well. I don't know that I'll go a ton more in depth really on this tournament before we get a little bit closer to it. But just even the prospect of getting more of these interleague matchups, right? I think this is still, it's hard to gauge too much with the games being played in the United States in terms of the difference in quality of these teams. But MLS, performed fairly well last year. Obviously, Miami winning the whole thing. Like it was an all MLS final. Are we going to see that again? What is the level of MLS versus Liga MX? I think we're still trying to get a handle on that. And this competition at least gets us a little closer.
Yeah, for sure. I have always thought that when you take, for example, the top teams from Liga MX and top teams from MLS, Liga MX teams could be potentially slightly above, but when it comes to the rest of the league, I think that's where MLS might have an advantage. And I think we kind of saw that a little bit of last year. And we'll see because also some Liga MX teams didn't really care much for this tournament last year. And then it will be interesting to see if after not doing well, they try to bounce back.
Agreed.
Alrighty. So now let's go into the Concacaf Champions Cup discussion. It begins this week, primarily with Liga MX teams playing some Central American and Caribbean teams. MLS teams will start playing in a couple of weeks from now. In your perspective, what are the MLS teams that you think are built the best for this competition this year?
Yeah, I think the two obvious ones really are the two that got the bye through that first round, right? So it's the Columbus Crew and it's Inter Miami. Miami, obviously winning Leagues Cup last year, they have tons of expectations that are being put on them by themselves and by those of us on the outside as well. I think they will enter this competition as favorites, regardless of league. And then the Crew were excellent in Major League Soccer last year. They really hit their stride after the first, opening stretch of the season. They got stronger despite real changes in the summer transfer window, and then they go and win MLS Cup. It could take them a little bit of time to get back to that form this season. I don't think they'll pick up right where they left off, but I've talked with Crew manager Will Fernandez. He and I sat down over the offseason, and he said, our group is at a 6 right now, a 6 out of 10 for where we think we could be. So he clearly thinks there are other tactical wrinkles for them to implement, that there are other ways that the team can continue to gel and get more comfortable. It's a very, very similar roster for Columbus, and a really, really strong one at that. So there are other teams. I think Cincinnati has a real shot of making a deep run here as well. Those are the three really that stand out to me, but Columbus and Miami especially.
Yeah, and one thing that's intriguing is, for example, I agree with you with those teams. The thing that's a little unfortunate for MLS is Inter Miami, Columbus, and Cincinnati are on the same side of the bracket with Monterrey and Tigres, which you expect to be two of the toughest rivals from Liga MX. Um, so taking that into account, maybe Philadelphia Union, who may have to go through Pachuca or Toluca, might have a little easier path to get a little bit to the semifinals before potentially taking on America or Chivas.
Yeah, that's a good point about the bracket. You look at this bracket and there are a lot of promising, not just MLS teams, but teams in this region, all sort of stacked on that side. We're almost certainly not going to get an all MLS final, right? Even if the Crew or Miami make it all the way, it's not likely that the Union or the Revs are going to be able to make their way across on the other side. So we could be looking at a Liga MX MLS final, which I think would be preferred for a lot of folks. But then also you look at Monterrey looking down in that side of the bracket. They've got Brendan Vasquez now, who's been sharp for them early on after moving from Cincinnati. There's obviously so much other quality in that team. Even without Brendan Vasquez, they would absolutely still be amongst the favorites in this competition. Like, it wouldn't be a shock to me at all to see Monterrey come through the bottom half of that bracket and go take on somebody from the top half.
Yeah, and that's one of the biggest potential matchups that you can see in this tournament. Like a potential Nashville, Inter Miami, a potential Monterrey, Cincinnati with Brandon Vasquez going back to Cincy. So all those are potentially will be potentially great games to watch. So are the ones that we know already? Is there something that catches your eye? Like what do you expect from Houston Dynamo against St. Louis, and what do you expect from the other MLS teams like Orlando?
Yeah, I'm really curious to see what the Dynamo and St. Louis are going to look like. Both teams have had far stronger seasons in the Western Conference of Major League Soccer last year than anybody expected. I won't be shy about it. I picked St. Louis to finish either last or second to last in the West. I don't remember. I'm not trying to make myself sound better because I sound bad either way. They end up winning the whole Western Conference. Are they going to keep up that momentum this year? Are they not? I lean more towards the latter, but maybe they're kind of built for this knockout style competition where they can play more aggressive and not have to worry too much about the field conditions because they're kind of built for the scrap anyway. And then the Dynamo, they're dealing with injuries, certainly to Hector Herrera right now, which is a massive loss for them, and I think pretty much completely dissolves their chances of making a deep run in this competition. But they still have some quality there in that matchup. The other one that I'm really curious about, going back up to the Union, them taking on Saprissa. The Union have had some pretty spicy and fiery matchups with Costa Rican teams before. So I'm curious to see what this game will look like. Saprissa, obviously one of the biggest clubs in Costa Rica, probably the biggest club in Costa Rica. The Union absolutely should be favored, but the reward for winning that round one matchup is to go and play Pachuca in the round of 16. So things aren't going to get particularly easy for them as time goes on. I think Orlando City should take care of business against Calvary in their in the bottom of the bracket there. The Revs should get past Independiente, and I think probably have a pretty straightforward ticket to the quarterfinals if they can get past Alajuelense. And then Cincinnati are going to take care of business against Cavalier as well. So and then Nashville. Nashville's the other one I lost track of there. I think we'll advance to that round of 16 to play into Miami, and then we get a Leagues Cup matchup probably coming back, and that's going to be a fun one.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a little disappointed because I was hoping to see Messi having to travel and play like Saprissa or Olympia sometime in Central America. But
Mm,
the other thing I wanted to ask you is not a good thing for MLS, but almost every year there's one team that underperforms and gets eliminated early on. Toronto against Sky a few years ago, Seattle against Olympia, and Austin against BLA. So, is there a team that you're concerned with that could make an early exit? Oh, because I was thinking on New England Revolution playing Independiente from Panama with all the ordeal that the first had at the end of the season with Bruce Arena and then all the changes that
yeah.
are coming. They didn't finish playing that well. So that was a candidate that jumped up to be potentially that may struggle early on.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I would still expect them to break through just because I think all these MLS teams are expected to go through in this first
Yeah.
round, right? Like you look at the teams, except for Houston and St. Louis who play each other, right? But you look at all these matchups and they're designed to be lopsided. So the safe bet is obviously projecting some of these teams to go through, but you're absolutely right. Every year it feels like we get a massive, incredible failure. Austin FC were the best example of that in ever, maybe last year. Like, it was an absolutely epic implosion from Austin FC. I think there will probably be one of those MLS teams. I think about maybe Nashville having some trouble breaking down Mocha, right? I think about the New England Revolution, even though I think they probably are going to make it into the quarterfinals. I don't love their roster, to be honest with you. I think there are major questions. And you bring in a new manager after a really chaotic end to last season. Are they unstoppable right now? Absolutely not. So I think it is right, as always, to be on upset watch, especially with MLS teams, still in preseason right now. And these games, in some ways, will function as an extension of the preseason, at least in this opening round.
Alrighty. And now projecting a little bit further, because there are some enticing potential matchups. We talked about Philadelphia against Pachuca. There's a potential America Chivas game in the next round. I mean, potentially Tigres Orlando and then potentially Columbus Tigres in the quarterfinal. So,
Yeah.
what would be like the top 2 or 3 matchups that you would love to see in Concacaf Champions Cup?
Yeah, I'll stick with the top one because I think the Columbus Crew taking on Tigres is so enticing. Like, I mean, absolutely a delicious matchup. We saw Columbus take on Club America in Leagues Cup last year. Like, we've seen some fun matchups between MLS teams and Liga MX teams. More of them now with Leagues Cup, than we're used to. Like, that is one that has the potential to be just, I think, delightful. The Crew play beautiful soccer. Tigres play, every time I watch them, it's much more talent driven than maybe tactics driven. Not that there isn't a streamlined approach there, but I mean, you take one of the heavy hitters from Mexico and put them up against the reigning champions in Major League Soccer, a team that I think everybody, even FC Cincinnati fans, begrudgingly admit is a really, really good side. Like, you pair those together in this knockout competition, and you're really cooking with gas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we'll see Inter Miami with Tigres in the Leagues Cup, but we could potentially see Inter Miami against Monterrey, the other big Monterrey side, and whoever Philadelphia Union takes on their side. I mean, Pachuca last season they were really bad, and then all of a sudden they bring in Salomon Rondon, and all of a sudden he's scoring goals for bunches, and that looks like a very dangerous team. So that could be another interesting one. Philadelphia Pachuca.
Oh, sorry, I lost you there, Edwin. But yeah, Philadelphia Pachuca, I think it's a strong matchup. And anytime you can get the Union coming down and trying to cause some problems in Central and even in North America, even in the United States here in North America, like, they're always sort of up for the scrap under Jim Curtin. They've got Ale Bedoya back. Like, this is a team that embraces those kinds of challenges. And I think they're always a team that's pretty difficult to knock out in this kind of competition.
Absolutely. And now, having said that, I want to transition into the MLS season. We're gonna Columbus Crew comes as the defending champion, but for obvious reasons, I think all eyes are on Inter Miami that added Julian Gressel, Luis Suarez. So for you, what do you expect to be the biggest storylines, at least in the early going of the MLS season?
Yeah, I'll set Inter Miami aside just because they'll get plenty of run, and I think folks can hear about them from all sorts of people at all sorts of times. We've already talked about them today as well. I'm really curious to see what the balance of power in Ohio looks like, which is not a sentence I expected to be saying at any point in my life. But Cincinnati win the Shield last year, the Columbus Crew win MLS Cup, both really strong teams. I think the Columbus Crew maintained their strength over the offseason, and I'm not sure the same is true of FC Cincinnati. Losing Brendan Vasquez, they bring in Corey Baird in free agency, which I think is a smart move. I would feel a lot more comfortable with him as a third attacking option rather than the second next to Aaron Bupenza. But I still think he's in for a strong season because great teams have a way of making, fine players look good. And I think Corey Baird fits in that category. So I'm very curious to see what that is going to look like over in Cincinnati, in Ohio, excuse me. And then zooming out, I'm just curious to see what the Western Conference is going to look like, period, this year. It was a really, really bad year for the West last season. St. Louis won the whole thing. They wouldn't have been one of the top teams in the East if it was one combined table here, if they were over competing in the Eastern Conference. LAFC only used 2 of their DP slots, and they currently have 2 of them wide open right now that are unfilled, at least as we're recording. The Seattle Sounders lose Nico Lodeiro, let him walk over to Orlando City. They don't really replace him with a number 10. They don't replace him with a number 10 at all. Pedro de la Vega, they go out and sign as a young DP from Lanús in Argentina. He's a winger, straight up. He likes to have his boots on the chalk outside, especially on the left, and cut in. Like, he's a very different player than Nicola Lodeiro was. So, what is the balance of power in the Western Conference? Who is going to really make a run? My gut says it will be Seattle and LAFC finishing right up towards the top of the West yet again. But the Galaxy, I think, have made smart moves both on and off the field. Dallas have gone out and spent a club record amount of money to sign Peter Musa from Benfica. You look at even some of the other clubs deeper down the table. Portland have 2 open DP slots, and I think have gotten really obviously better in the offseason with Kamal Miller and Maxime Crepeau fixing 2 of their biggest needs from last year. If they can get a couple of attacking pieces right, especially after the 2 players who were in those DP slots last season, and Jimmy Chara and Jaroslav Niashkoda weren't providing anything for them basically in the attack, like, that's a team that could skyrocket up to, I don't know, maybe third in the West. Like, I don't think that's unreasonable. So there's a lot for grabs over in the Western Conference.
Alrighty, and what do you make of the whole situation at LASC with Buanga apparently saying that he wants out when he's still in contract, and the whole situation with Carlos Vela still not sorted out?
I wouldn't be too worried about LAFC right now. It seems like Buanga, a lot of him talking about maybe wanting to go back to Europe, was posturing for a new deal. And it sounds like that maybe there are some negotiations happening there at the moment. So it wouldn't surprise me if he becomes one of the higher paid players in MLS as we get closer and closer to the start of the season. Who knows what's going to happen with Carlos Vela? Right now, it's feeling more and more like he's going to be back. I think John Thorrington, chief soccer officer for LAFC, would much prefer that happen as a non-DP deal. But if you're not going to use that third slot anyway, maybe there's some merit there. We'll see on that front. And LAFC in general have the global might and seems like have the desire to go out and sign big time players, at least relative to a lot of other teams in MLS. So, I think LAFC fans, even though there's a lot of turnover from last year, I think LAFC fans should still expect a very, very competitive, trophy contending product as they get this year started.
All right. And in your view, I mean, what have been some of the most underrated moves in the offseason? Because we know about Hugo Lloris going to LAFC, Luis Suarez coming to Inter Miami. But for some of the signings that are not being talked about as much, that you're excited to see what it looks like.
Yeah, the Rapids have gotten a decent amount of buzz, but I'm excited to see George Mihailovic back in Major League Soccer. Was off with AZ in the Netherlands, and that loan stint, or that transfer, didn't work out for him. And I think he needed to be back in the US for personal reasons. And so it's good to see him back here. The Rapids have made a ton of moves in this offseason. Their ceiling's still pretty low because Kevin Cabral and Rafael Navarro are not DP level players really. And so I think that is going to really restrict what the Rapids can accomplish this year. But Giorgio was one of the best playmakers in the league before he left for Europe. That was 2022 under Wilfred Nancy with CF Montreal. Can he regain some of that form? How dependent was he on the system around him being so good? Or is he individually capable of really pulling the strings and being an elite chance creator even when the talent around him isn't quite as good? That's a move that I'm really, really curious about. And then to shift over to the Eastern Conference, Atlanta United's transfers in general, right? They have really committed to going out and signing players from a very specific market. They have gone after talent in the French second division over and over and over again. They get Jean De Silva from Ligue 2. They get Tristan Mayumba from Ligue 2. Those are both last summer. And then this offseason, they go out and sign Stian Gregerson as their Miles Robinson replacement. Robinson going to FC Cincinnati in free agency. He was probably the hottest free agent on the market this winter. Like, Atlanta look like the real deal, to the point where if Thiago Almada was 28 and performing at his level and not really in the European shop window, if he was going to stick around for the entire year, I think we're talking about Atlanta United as legitimate supporter shield contenders. But with that big, dark cloud looming over their summer, when European teams will absolutely come knocking for Almada, who wants to go to Europe, and Atlanta seem willing to sell for the right price, all of a sudden shifting out your, MLS MVP level number 10 and trying to go out and I know Garth Lagerwey will find and already has a list of folks that he wants to fill in when Almada goes and eventually moves to Europe. But making that transition in the middle of a year is really, really difficult. But the work that Atlanta have done so far this winter, I think they're done at this point in the offseason, at least with major moves. Like they have gotten, I think, really, really strong over the last two windows, and this window obviously is a big part of that.
Already. And also, in your opinion, I mean, who are some of the clubs that could make the biggest moves? Teams that maybe underperformed last year that could make the biggest jumps for the 2024 season. I know you already mentioned Portland as one of those potential teams.
Yeah, Portland and the West really do stand out. Colorado, I'll be really surprised if they finish at the bottom of the West. I don't know for sure if they're a playoff team, but I think they're much closer to that 8, 9, 10 spot in the West. LA Galaxy as well, I think are bound to shoot up. They've gone out and snagged Gabriel Peck as a young DP from Brazil. Not the flashy on-ball presence that you would expect maybe a young DP winger from Brazil to be, but he is forceful and effective and can be direct and still has plenty of skill on the ball, crashes the box really well, moves off the ball very well. He makes this team better, and it seems like they're still in the market for one other attacking, DP player. So having that option around Ricky Puig makes them, I think, a much better team from the jump. And then shifting over to the Eastern Conference, tossing Miami out of the equation because they're probably due for the biggest points jump of anybody this season. But I also look at NYCFC, who I think continue to go out there and sign really, really talented young players. I think they're probably a bit too young to be a real, genuine trophy contender. They were the second youngest team in MLS last year, just after the New York Red Bulls. So they're Hudson River Derby rivals there. But this team has signed legitimate elite talent, both from South America and now just earlier today, as we're recording, they've been connected to a really promising Serbian 18-year-old striker who Bayer Leverkusen, according to some reports that seem reputable, were very, very interested in. And Bayer Leverkusen are sort of leading the German title race right now. So they've gone out and made legit moves. They brought in Hannes Wolf, a 24-year-old winger with high-level European pedigree, to give them something of a veteran, if we can call him that, presence in the attack. And this group has just had a little more time to gel. I think they were much better than their final place in the standings indicated last year, and they have gotten noticeably stronger without losing very many key players this offseason. I think NYCFC are absolutely a playoff team, and I would feel better about them finishing, sixth or higher in the East than I would about them finishing below that mark.
Oh, wow, it's interesting. Alrighty. So I think that's pretty good setup to outlook of what to expect for 2024. So now I want to switch over to talk about Backheeled, your personal project. So can you tell us a little bit of the coverage that you try to have it on backheeled.com and what you have your plans for 2024?
Yeah, absolutely. So Backheeled started just as a little bit of history. We started in started in May of 2022 and then moved over and started accepting subscriptions in January the following year. And we've been just so stoked to see this project continue to grow and continue to cover the game in the United States. And that's ultimately what we want to do. We want to take American soccer coverage one step further and zoom in, right? We don't want to just tell stories, but we want to tell stories that change how you think about this sport, right? Not just recapping what happens on the field, but trying to, explain maybe why it happened, having some fun along the way as well. So we cover MLS in depth and NWSL and USL in depth as well. We cover the men's and women's national teams and other stories around the game that are sort of in the United States or connected to it in one way or another. We'll get wacky on Fridays sometimes and look at some of the craziest stuff that's happened in the past week. We do a lot of stuff and we have a lot of fun along the way with Backheeled. So we are stoked for 2024. The plan is absolutely, and we're going to have MLS coverage of every team every single week, digging into one talking point for every team in Major League Soccer. We want to be the home for independent MLS coverage and are making real steps towards doing that. We also have the Copa America coming up this year as well. And we're going to make our biggest travel investment yet and go and cover the team throughout the entire tournament for the U.S. men's national team. So that's something we're very, very excited about as well. So if you want to support ambitious, exciting, fun, young-ish American soccer coverage, go check out backheeled.com. And I think we've got a lot of good stuff over there.
Awesome to hear that. And on that note, also that you mentioned Copa America, I mean, what are your expectations for the U.S. men's national team? I mean, it seems like they have a good path to advance, but they have Uruguay in that group, and they have the toughest side of the bracket with potentially Brazil, Colombia emerging from the other group.
Yeah, man, I am expecting, and I predicted on other shows, the U.S. finishing second to Uruguay in their group, which means if Brazil finished top of their group, we would get U.S. Brazil in that next round. And I think that's probably where the U.S.'s run ends. With that being said, Brazil haven't been incredibly strong in World Cup qualifying recently. They've had challenges. So maybe they don't finish top of the group and the U.S. gets somebody else, or maybe they do and the U.S. takes care of business, or maybe the U.S. finishes top of their group over Uruguay. There's so many things that could happen here. I don't think a semifinal run is impossible for the United States. I also don't think they should be favored to make a run to the semifinal, if that makes sense, right? So I think it is absolutely within the realm of possibility. I think the U.S. is much more likely to go out and lose to Brazil in the quarterfinals, and there'll be a lot of vitriol surrounding Greg Berhalter, as there always is, but nobody really will complain all that much because, or at least not more than normal, because the United States losing to Brazil is not like this great shock, right? I think that's a pretty reasonable outcome. So that's what I'm envisioning for this summer.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I see. Obviously, if you make it back to the group stage, is hashtag fireable halter all the way. If you make the semifinals, it's already great. If the final and potentially win it is amazing. But I think the expectation has to be quarterfinal, and at least to be very competitive in that quarterfinal, whether it's most likely Brazil or Colombia.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right. Just going back a little bit to Backheeled, I mean, can you talk me quickly on how the idea came up? What
Sure.
compelled you to go that direction?
Yeah, just sort of seeing a hole in the American soccer media landscape. This idea that there's a lot of good, or there is at least some good American soccer coverage out there already. I think The Athletic does a fantastic job. There's very talented people working for ESPN and Yahoo and Fox and these other outlets as well, but a very limited discussion of certain parts of our game and very limited discussion about what actually happens on the field, right? So our hope with our MLS coverage this year is to peel back the onion a little bit and to actually look at, what are the underlying causes for some of this stuff, to dig a little deeper, to look at, what actually happens in these games and not just look at always the big picture narratives and stories. There's a place for all that stuff. And we'll bring some of that stuff as well, but trying to provide more balance and fill a gap that we see as being very real in this space. And then serving fans who are underserved, right? Whether that's fans of specific MLS teams or USL teams or NWSL teams, there still isn't, I don't think all of their needs are being met right now. And certainly with some of the lower division stuff, we have John Morrissey doing fantastic work for us, covering the United Soccer League right now, especially the championship. And those fans just don't get a lot of love from a national perspective. And John and some of the more national stuff that I'll do as well, we try to get at that and provide them what they want, right? And so we're hoping to continue doing more and more of that. We've got big plans for our USL coverage this year. Really, really excited about it. Same goes with the NWSL, where Ariana Cascon does great stuff for us, often looking at some of the numbers and really diving into what actually happens again on the field in these games, because I think people really do want that stuff.
Already. And just to wrap things up, can you just give me a couple of things that you hope to see in 2024 when it comes to soccer overall, whether it's MLS, national team? What are your hopes for 2024?
Well, so I'll be selfish a little bit first. I hope to see Lionel Messi play live and in person in 2024. It feels like it'll be a waste of my spot in this landscape. Just being someone who does cover this sport, who's never seen Lionel Messi play live before. That's a really cool experience, and I'm envious of many of my colleagues for having already. And I hope to check that off the list this year for me personally. And then other soccer things that I'm hoping to see. I'm really excited about what the Emma Hayes era could look like for the United States women's national team. Seeing the U.S. win at the Olympics this summer will be fascinating. I think seeing what Emma Hayes wants to do tactically will be a very interesting part of all of that. So I'm very curious to see if the U.S. make a deep run of that competition and what an Emma Hayes team actually looks like. And then watching a whole bunch of soccer along the way, right? Seeing what's next for MLS and how they respond with Inter Miami either being as good as we think they are or not being as good as we think they are. A couple of new teams in the NWSL. My local club, Phoenix Rising, making a run all the way to the USL Championship final last year and winning the trophy. What do they have in their back pocket in the second division? Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of storylines.
All right. Great to hear. We'll end it with that. Thank you so much again, Joseph, for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it so much. And best of luck.
Thank you so much for having me.
Backheeled.com.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.